喺過去嘅2個星期咧，香港面對既緊張又危難嘅日子，我哋特別咧邀請到對領袖訓練以及係社會危機處理好有研究嘅美國加州宣道會 Simpson University 辛普森大學學術教務長、辛普森大學圖書神學研究院教務主任 Dr. Patrick Blewett 布伯德博士啦，同我哋分享一下。Hello, Dr. Blewett.
Hello.
Welcome and thank you. It's such an honor for us to have you here with us today. So we all know that Hong Kong is facing a crisis today.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay.
And actually, in such a situation, in such a crisis situation, we know that your expertise in a leadership training and you are a leader yourself. So first of all, let's talk about a leader. Like, what do you think, what are some of the good elements that a leader should have?
That takes actually a lot of time and energy and interaction with people. You want them to experience crisis situations for them to gain confidence that they won't panic, but they'll be able to think through and work through the kinds of issues and be able to lead people and respond to them in a positive way.
Do you think, or do you agree that everyone is able to be a leader, or do you think there are certain things that a leader should have or a person should have to become a leader?
Leaders are made, not born. And it's about the training process and giving them the ability to experience roles of being in leadership and progressing and growing in those kinds of situations. So if I'm working with a high school student, there's certain things that I would do for leadership there, which would be different than what I would do if he was going to be an adult
or CEO of a company.
Of a corporation. It's a step-by-step process where they gain that confidence in additional roles.
What are some of the obstacles that they normally would face, or obstacles that they would need to be overcoming?
Sometimes a leader struggles with self-confidence, and equally you've got some leaders who are so overly confident, and so either one of those kind of obstacles is the greater challenge. And then do they have a teachable spirit? Do they want to learn how to respond and how to care for people in the midst of a situation?
So when we talk about crisis, we normally see people are divided into different groups, and mostly because they share same or similar opinions or point of views. And is it true that they usually have some kind of theme that united them together? What are some of the normal behaviors for the people?
There's patterns, and patterns can turn into themes. So pattern may be, for example, in the United States when there were issues of human rights kinds of issues would have been a part of that. And then what happens is as a location develops, then it begins to become thematic. So it may end up being with similar clothing patterns, or it may be similar marches, or it may be similar music. There's a variety of things that could take place that becomes thematic, that becomes the identity of that particular group.
I see. And it's true that they normally have their own theme. And one interesting thing that we find in Hong Kong today during this whole crisis is that this Christian song came up, Sing Hallelujah to the Lord. This song became so popular not only among Christians, among non-Christians as well. And do you find this is normal, that like a particular song just came up and became like a big popularity?
So in the United States in the 60s with the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King had Christian music that integrated into that. So to see a Christian song show up here in the last 2 weeks doesn't surprise me, but it also, I think, is a testament to the positive nature of what's happened here in terms of this, and they're not hitting people or the rest of those kinds of things. So it seems natural that we could see a little bit of praise in the midst of it that comes together and becomes part of your identity here.
And it's also because a lot of Christians came out during the crisis this time, and when they are united together, there's a power, and what they do is pray and sing praise, and that become a testimony, like you said. Do you find that this is actually a comforting thing, not only for Christians in the community, but also people in Hong Kong overall?
My guess is the people of Hong Kong had a sense of peace in the midst of this. And that's a testimony to to the believers who were part of the situation, that they would be able to help people go, we don't have to accelerate and turn this into an anxiety or a conflict-based situation, but it's about just speaking the truth the way they wanted to speak it.
And actually, normally people would think that Christians don't speak up a lot in the community or in the society. And what do you think about the Christians this time in Hong Kong? They're, like I mentioned, they start singing praise, and that's how this song got so popular.
Each group is going to have to decide for themselves how far and what do they do in the midst of those kinds of situations. So what I might be comfortable doing may look different than what someone here would look like. And part of that role of leadership, back to the original question, was how do we trust and care for each other enough to provide room for diversity in the midst of that. And so that's part of where I would go. It's neat to see what's happened. As an American, we were watching the news a week ago, and we were amazed that the crowd, after the protest took place, stopped and cleaned up after themselves. That's, in our world, that was the amazing thing, to see people take a stand and then clean up after themselves and take care of their community as a whole. That was fun to see.
That was unique and kind of unusual, you would say, right? I think that's how a lot of Hong Kong people would be proud of themselves for doing that. Try to make it as like a peaceful protest. So we don't only see crisis in Hong Kong during this period of time, but throughout the world, throughout the histories, we see a lot of crises that arise in the community, in the society. What are some of the good examples that they have taken care of the crisis perfectly, for the in terms of crisis management? Could you name a few?
Sure. Probably the one that I think of most right now, it happened a year ago in Thailand, when the kids went into the cave and got trapped, and the whole government had to come together to find a way to get them out.
Right.
Now, there was tragedy in the midst of crisis, but they worked together and they accepted the risk, and there was success in the end. So that would be an example of positively working through it.
And what do you think about how they handle the people outside of the cave? I mean, how did they handle the people in Thailand, people that are so concerned about the situation?
So in a crisis situation, you have the group that's working with the original crisis point, the kids, who's going to take care of them. Then you have to think through who's going to take care of the parents. Mm-hmm. Then it's who's going to take care of the perimeters of those situations to keep everybody else out of the road. And then who else do we need to have involved in the midst of all of that? So the leadership team has to think strategically about all of those various groups and who's going to care for each individual group. And then once you have the group that you're going to be responsible for, you begin to narrow your focus in order to focus in to take care of that. So if I was working with the parents of those kids, there would probably be a family assigned to each one of the parents. Mm-hmm. And then they would be there, and they would be responsible for where we're going to house them, who's feeding them, how do they get away from the media, who's caring for the media in the midst of those kinds of things, because everyone experiences some degree of trauma in the midst of that. So that's what we do with that.
And that's how a good example is to take care of the whole situation, every little detail that we have to pay attention to. And of course, back to the Bible, we also see a lot of crises throughout the Bible. And could you tell us some of the crisis situation in the Bible and what we could learn from it? Like, how did they handle it?
If I look at the Old Testament, one of the stories that pops out in my head today would be David with King Saul. And here David is trying to comfort the king, and the king is furious. What's he do? He pulls up his spear, throws it across the room at him. Now that's conflict.
Right.
Real conflict when you have somebody attempting to kill you. And David was like, no, I'm not going to touch the Lord's anointed, but I need to figure out how to get out of here before I get killed. Mm-hmm. So that would be a realm of what conflict can look like on a one-on-one basis. In the New Testament, in the book of Acts, we see a strange thing that happens. The church gets formed in Acts chapter 2, and by Acts chapter 6, there's a conflict about who's caring for and feeding the widows and the orphans. And in the midst of that conflict, I mean, it got pretty ugly.
Right.
Read chapter 6. So what did they do? The apostles said, well, let's wait a second, let's stop and pray. Let's leave us to preaching and praying, and you guys go select from among yourselves some deacons. And a deacon is basically someone who waits on tables, someone who cares for these people. And so it was the group choosing people to come alongside to solve the problem and to take care of it. And that particular conflict began to dissipate rather than people going, well, you didn't take care of us. No, so-and-so's taking care of you.
So it's more like you allocate the job
Yeah.
to the right person and kind of solve the situation.
That's right.
And how can we learn from these great examples as Christians when we face crisis?
Again, leadership needs to be wise enough, and that's the training of the leaders, to be wise enough not to escalate the conflicts. When there's conflict going on, a leader needs to be calm and to use their thinking part of the brain rather than their emotional part. And in the midst of that, to go, okay, what's it going to take for us to create peace, be a peacemaker, rather than escalating this? We all thrive at, if we stir the pot a little bit, then we might be the hero kind of a thing. And that's not what we need. Godly leadership are the kinds of folks who quietly come along, calm things down, help people look at other sides of the issue so that we may not agree with the other sides of the issue, but we at least understand it enough that we go, I trust them. They're my brothers and sisters in Christ. They're going to look at it differently. They've got different gifts than me, but I'm going to trust them, and we're going to work together for the sake of the kingdom.
So you mentioned about how a leader should handle the situation, but what about those who are not leaders? How should we learn from the Bible? What kind of attitude that we should have if we're not the leader, but we're in the midst of the crisis?
If you're in the midst of the situation, you may end up becoming the leader.
Okay. You could become a leader,
That's
actually.
Right. The peacemaker will automatically rise to the top and be able to impact those around them. They may not impact 2.4 million people, but they may impact the dozen people that are standing near them. To say, no, we're not going to move that barrier. We're going to leave it there because authorities put it there, and we're going to honor their movement. We can just back up a step and leave it alone. And that doesn't sound exciting, but that's the mark of a good leader.
Right.
And a leader is someone who has followers. So those around them will go, oh, I guess we could do that. Yeah, that makes sense. We'll leave that alone.
And that's the key word, peacemaker. It's very important in a crisis.
Yes.